many times have you been interrupted when talking to a colleague or friend? And can you think of a time when you were in a meeting and zoned out, or started formulating a response in your head while your friend or colleague was still talking? We live in such a fast-paced world that we find ourselves moving from one activity to the next, while our brains can't keep up. The outcome is a world where a lot of people aren't living in the present moment. We aren't present for ourselves or for others. My guest today, Rachel Schneider, is Executive Clinical Director and co-founder of Delta Counseling and has decades of experience helping people on their mental health journeys through compassionate coaching and counseling. I believe there is a lot that corporate leaders can learn from mental health counselors who regularly practice empathy and active listening and have methods for overcoming compassion fatigue that is becoming increasingly common in the workplace. This is E3. Empower and engage with empathy. The first question I have for you today is around active listening. There was a recent study published by the International Journal of Research in Public Health, and it revealed that when supervisors regularly perform active empathic listening, employee engagement at work increases. And mental health counselors do this so well. So tell me, Rachel, is active listening a learned behavior, or is it just genetic and we can forget about ever being able to learn how to be an active listener?
A good question. So I like to think about it as far as, a learned behavior versus a teachable behavior. Anything could be a teachable behavior, but can someone actually learn it and implement it into their life? Because we can all learn the active listening skills, but it's a matter of practicing that in your daily life and being able to use it in your communication style.
Well, that's good news. I'm glad that there is hope for the world and that we can actually learn how to be better active listeners. I know this is something I personally work on a very regular basis. To take that a little bit further, what would you recommend to a busy business leader who wants to improve his or her listening skills?
Well, I think some of the basic active listening skills involve, really hearing what the person is saying instead of thinking about while they're talking what you're going to say next. I think a lot of the time we get caught up in what we're going to say in part of the conversation that we're not even paying attention to what whoever is talking to us is actually saying because we're so worried about our response. So it's really being able to sit there and hear what they're saying. And sometimes to practice that, you can use the skill of reflective listening. So when they, say something to you, you repeat it back to them as they said it so that they can clarify anything that you maybe got wrong or didn't understand. So, for example, like, give me something that you would, just a random, topic or sentence that you might hear in a team meeting or at work.
Oftentimes I was in meetings where I was presenting. And I think this is a really interesting one too. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this because the world of presenting changed dramatically during the pandemic when people who were used to going into office buildings and maybe giving in-person presentations in conference rooms were forced to give presentations virtually through their laptop cameras. So it definitely takes a certain adaptation to engage your audience, but also be an active listener when you're just staring at a screen and trying to listen to someone present. I would often present typically the marketing plan that I had developed for the year. So, it would have been maybe 3, 4, 5 slides, and they were typically overview slides and it would take about 20 minutes. And, you'd have a group of stakeholders on the call, maybe 10 people max. And you would essentially be socializing the marketing strategy for the year, as well as the tactical communications plan that aligned with that strategy.
Would your stakeholders then comment back or give their feedback on it?
Typically, I would present first, and then at the end, there would be there'd be Q&A, but then I had, depending on the stakeholder group, a list of questions for them as well. is there a particular part of this plan that resonates with you, or a part that doesn't, or needs to be edited or changed? So it was very much a two-way feedback session.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think an example of active listening there would be, or in any case, starting with something like, so if I'm hearing you correctly, you are wanting to do X, Y, or Z. Is that correct? Or did I miss anything? Like that type of a question is a really good way to practice some basic active listening skills, asking for clarification, essentially.
Yep. No, that's a good one. And I also remember you telling me at one point, and I think this is funny because I've heard this before as well, about not always trying to problem solve and sitting in the suck. Anytime I just want someone to listen to me, or I go to my husband first because we have a good relationship, and he's always already thinking about how to solve the problem. And I'm like, no, don't solve the problem. I just want you to listen to me. I don't want you to solve it. Just listen. What's your take on that?
Yes, I think that that's definitely a common thing. And I think too, it's part of our society. Like we live in a society that's all about doing the next thing and getting to the next place and solving the next problem and, achieving. And I'm sure that's the case in the business world too. So it's very kind of counterintuitive to have a problem that you're expressing and the immediate response isn't to start going through your list of ways to solve it. So I think, going along with the active listening piece, a good way to start those conversations too, because people will automatically go to that, is stating at the very beginning of the conversation, like, I'm going to share something with you and I just need you to listen. I don't need us to come up with any types of ideas right now. I'm still processing it. So here it is. And then if you give them that sort of warning in advance, they know what the expectation is as far as responding to you too. But it's hard because it's uncomfortable to sit in the suck and not try to figure out a way out of it. And that's why it's hard for us as therapists too, because a lot of what we do all day is sit in the suck with people. And, we're not here to solve their problems. We're here to sit with them and, guide them to the best decisions in their life. So I get a lot of practice at it. In my work day, I can't say that I am as good at doing it in my own life, because it's hard. It takes a lot of practice, and it's not like the intuitive response.
Yeah, sure. No, and it's interesting what you said about not being as good at it in your personal life. And I think that ties in really nicely to the next question I had for you around compassion fatigue. So you spend all day trying to sit in the suck and help people, or as you said, guide people through their challenge rather than trying to immediately solve their problem. And then you come home at night and your kids come to you with problems, your partner comes to you with problems, and you have to somehow sit in their suck too, which is really hard. So, I never really understood compassion fatigue until we went through the pandemic together, and it really started to pop up as this popular term where we saw especially essential workers like mental health counselors and healthcare professionals, where they were experiencing unprecedented levels of emotional and physical trauma as they cared for patients, and in your case, clients. And although the amount of suffering that doctors and nurses and social workers encountered during the pandemic was intense, people in other professions struggled with compassion fatigue too. We were all just trying to grapple with constant change and uncertainty. And I actually read a recent Harvard Business Review article that discusses the prevalence of compassion fatigue in leaders and managers in the corporate workplace. So, on top of their daily demands, leaders were expected to be more sensitive to employee needs, and support team members recovering from grief, loss, and even lapses in mental health. So, as a mental health counselor, how have you experienced compassion fatigue? And if so, how did you overcome it?
Yeah, I think I agree with you that it was really during the pandemic that it seemed to come to light more for people. But in all honesty, it existed in our profession even before the pandemic because, all day, every day we're hearing about, all of the trauma that people have experienced in their lives. And that in and of itself can be very traumatic. I mean, there is such a thing as vicarious trauma or secondary trauma, where you can be traumatized just by hearing about another person's trauma, which I definitely feel is and was the case for me. And yeah, it's very, very hard. And I feel like in the business world too, it's almost like if you are experiencing those things, you have to just be able to shut it off and go into your next meeting, and act like everything's fine, even if your house is burning down. So I think it's a really, really tough thing to try to cope with. As far as how I have dealt with it, what's been really the most important thing for me has been various degrees of self-care. And that's just become more and more important to me, actually, as I've gotten older and the longer that I've been in this field, I've realized how important self-care is. And I think there's also in our society this myth about what self-care is. Like people picture this spa day and pedicures, and anyone's actually doing that. I mean, maybe they are, but self-care is more like, sometimes it could be taking a shower. It could be like eating breakfast. It could be some really basic things, especially if you're going through a really difficult time when just meeting those basic things, aren't happening on a regular basis. So I think we need to maybe try to work to eliminate this idea that self-care is some sort of luxurious thing that's, a privilege, and start encouraging people to broaden their view of it and start to incorporate it into their daily life. Some ideas, some things that I have found to be helpful, for sure, have been journaling is a big one, whether that be just free writing, like whatever thoughts for the day, or, now they have even prompts that you can get if you feel like you're going to sit there. And some of my clients say, like, I don't know what I would write about. So they would be, I have like books of different journal prompts that you can think about to use if you feel like you don't know what you would write about. And there's these bullet journals now. There's all kinds of different things for that. And you can do that fairly inexpensively. A couple other things, a gratitude practice. And this might sound kind of like simplistic, but I think it's really, really important and can be really helpful for anxiety. It's actually one of the best things for anxiety is practicing gratitude. If you're focused on the things that you are thankful for, there's less room for the things that you are anxious about. So it's not this power struggle of trying to push these anxious thoughts away. It's more of focusing on the things that are positive and that are good, in order to sort of crowd out those anxious thoughts. So I've definitely done this. I've had clients do, at the end of your day, write down 3 things you're grateful for. And sometimes like, I don't know, it's so hard. I'm like, it can be, I'm grateful that the sun came out today. One of mine that I love to do, because it's really important to me, is clean sheets. The day that I changed my sheets on my bed, like, that is awesome. I love the feeling of clean sheets.
Yes, amen.
So that is a gratitude. So it can be little, like it doesn't have to be these big things. The other big thing for me, and this has been more so recently, or more since the pandemic really, has been yoga. I think yoga too gets kind of this idea in our society that it's like this hippie dippy thing that only certain people do, and you have to eat organic and all this other stuff. But there really is some good research now that shows how helpful yoga is for mental health and for stress. So that's not just made up. I used to think I was one of those people too. I was like, yoga seems kind of dumb. But then I tried it, and it was actually during the pandemic. I couldn't go to the gym anymore because the gyms were closed. And so I decided to pull up some YouTube videos, and, I found some yoga that I really, really liked, and I started doing it. And honestly, I've been doing it for 4 years now, ever since the start of the pandemic, and it has been a life changer as far as my stress level and just, feeling more comfortable in my body and all of those types of things. So I would definitely encourage people to consider, and it doesn't even have to be a big thing. They have chair yoga now. You can do a little 5-minute stretch. It can be very simplistic and small. It doesn't have to be like going to a class. So those are kind of the big self-care things that I have found to be helpful.
Yeah. No, and I love all of those, and I think it's amazing to really think about how much the mind and the body are connected. So your point about yoga, gratitude practice, obviously the gratitude practice piece is much more a mental exercise, and the yoga is a physical exercise, but it's so intertwined and so connected. And if you can get if you can feel comfortable in your body and sound in your mind, it's such a magical combination. And the other thing that I wanted to mention with the gratitude practice piece, it reminded me of a recent talk that I attended. John Sakara. So if you're listening, I want to give you credit for this. So he's a consultant in change management, and his whole premise around helping guide companies and teams through change is to start with gratitude. And think about, you may be going through a major organizational restructuring, and there may even be layoffs. But if you start with what you're thankful for, and knowing that in the end, you may no longer be with this company. At the end of this whole process, you may no longer be here, but you can be thankful for the career experience you've had to date, the learning and development you've already had at this existing company, and already start. I think he called it, kind of packing your briefcase or your package for whatever your next adventure is going to be. So you can already start thinking about the future in a positive way, despite what the change will bring. And I thought that was a really cool way to help people kind of shift their mindset during what could be a very difficult and sometimes traumatic situation at work. I'm going to shift gears just a little bit around this question, because I do think that the self-care piece is important, and everything you mentioned is wonderful. And these are great methods that can be used by anyone who is dealing with compassion fatigue. But have you ever found that you needed more support beyond self-care? So you've done the journaling, you've done the gratitude practice, you do yoga, but there are certain situations at work that are just so hard on you that you just need more than that self-care practice.
Yeah, definitely. And, not to promote my own field, but therapy is a great idea when that comes up. And I am a big believer in therapy. I would hope I would be in being in the field. But even for therapists, I think therapists should be in therapy or have done therapy or had some experience with therapy in order to be an effective therapist, because it's important to be on the other side of the couch too, and know what that experience is like for the client by being a client yourself. And there are some different philosophical ideas or therapeutic techniques that actually require that in order to get some sort of further certification or something like that in their particular technique, is that you have to go through that type of therapy yourself as the client in order to get that certification. So I think a lot of, even in the therapy world, they're seeing the importance of therapists also having therapy. I think especially in the workplace, a lot of people aren't familiar with or don't know if their company has an employee assistance program. They don't feel like they always advertise that for whatever reason. I think, and I am on my husband's benefits, and like in the bottom of the package in the little fine print, like, oh, you get 3 sessions for free. Unless you were really looking for that, you wouldn't see that. So I think it's important, one, for companies to offer that as part of their benefit package, if possible, and then two, for the companies to actually promote people doing that, and taking part in that as part of their, way to keep their employees mentally well. I think we saw a lot of that, or at least I saw a lot of that during the pandemic too. There was definitely an increase in folks using their EAP benefits to come to counseling because they were having a hard time, adjusting to working from home and trying to be in a meeting with a kid climbing on them and a dog barking and all of those things that were very challenging during that time. The other, I guess, other than therapy, I think just being able to talk to other people about it, on some level. For me, it's important that, every week I get together with my team and we talk about cases and any clients that we're struggling with or, really having a hard time with, and we can be, transparent about that with our other, the other therapist and our dietitian here. And just being honest about how you're feeling, like even with a client, they can sense if, you're not quite yourself. So, if I have something going on or there's something that's, causing me stress that day, I'll say that to my client coming into the session. Just to let you know, I've had this headache all morning and, I've been trying to get rid of it. So if I seem a little, out of it or not on top of my game, I've been dealing with this headache, or, I dealt with a screaming child, 10 minutes before I got here. Just being able to be transparent about that, because chances are that other people are having the same issue and you don't know what they have been through that day or that week or that month or, in their lifetime.
Absolutely. I think that's a really good point. I feel like in the business world, there's this pressure to just kind of push through whatever you're experiencing in your personal life, and to just kind of push that down and keep it very business focused at work. And I'm not saying people should show up at work and just cry at your cubicle, but to have that level of transparency and be okay with telling your team if you're having an off day or your parents are sick and you've been caring for your elderly parents at home and it's been difficult for you, just being able to get that out on the table. Because once again, like you said, oftentimes the people who are working for you are dealing with similar situations at home, and then they feel at ease because they feel like they can be transparent about what's happening. So I absolutely I love that. So I wanted to ask you specifically about your specialty. I know you specialize in disordered eating, and that's a very niche area of mental health counseling. And you really work with people to transform their relationship with food. What led you to this specific type of mental health counseling?
I wish I had a very exciting answer for that. But as silly as it might sound, I honestly first remember learning about eating disorders in my health class in junior high. And I just found it interesting, right off the bat. And, obviously at that time hadn't decided I was going to be a therapist and specialize in eating disorders. But over, the course of, high school and early college, I struggled with my own disordered eating and eating disorder issues and body image and things like that. And that just kind of solidified for me that I wanted to specialize in helping other people who have had, similar struggles. And the mental health field itself has always called to me. I don't really know why. It's just always been interesting to me. So I knew I wanted to be a therapist from, a pretty young age, and I kept on that course. But it has been a very, not a straight road. I started out in community mental health, doing drug and alcohol, court-ordered group therapy. I graduated in 2008, 9, in the middle of the recession, and there were no jobs. And here I am, like, I need a job. And I have these student loans to pay. And so the job that was available was the court-ordered drug and alcohol group treatment program. So I did that for several years before I then moved on to a large group private practice in 2012. And ultimately, that's kind of where I wanted to be, was in a private practice specializing in eating disorders. But at that point in time, I had maybe seen like 2 clients that had eating disorders because, that just wasn't where I was, and that wasn't the population that was coming to treatment. And then it was just over the course of time, as I built up my caseload at a large group practice, that I eventually, started working more with eating disorder clients. And we had a small team at the practice that, we would do case consultations with. And then it wasn't until 2021 that I started my own practice, which, as a result, actually, of the pandemic too. I was at a smaller group practice, and the pandemic hit, and we were switching to telehealth sessions, and there was, it was just a harder transition for them. So I was, doing a lot of sessions from home and that type of thing, and I just kind of was toying with the idea of, like, maybe I should just do my own thing. And then one thing led to another, and we started Delta Counseling, and it was just me in like a little room to start out with. And now it's myself, and we've got another therapist, a dietitian, and we've got another therapist who will be joining us later this year. So it's definitely growing, and we have more clients than we have room for, unfortunately. And it's just been quite the journey.
I think that absolutely reinforces why your profession is so needed. Intuitive eating and body image is I think you'd be surprised how many people struggle with that, of all ages, not just the very vulnerable teenage and young adult years. So I think it's really cool that you're helping people through that and other concerns and challenges that they go through, because life throws all kind of curveballs, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
Oh, and just to wrap things up, I think, from a business perspective, what I learned from this conversation is, whenever I go back into the corporate world and lead a team, I will be much more aware of the broad range of challenges that people are struggling with on a daily basis, or even trauma too. And I think it's important to understand that there's a whole personal life that a person lives before they even walk into the office. And we have no idea if someone is lashing out in a meeting or just having a bad quarter or whatever. There's always most likely something behind it in their personal life that's causing them to show up in that way. And rather than punishing people, we should listen to them and help them and guide them through a tough time. Thank you so much, Rachel, for joining us today. And for our listeners, Rachel does have an eating disorder recovery workbook. So if any of you know someone who's struggling with an eating disorder, or if you yourself have this struggle, this is a really cool workbook that has some interesting exercises you can do to go through the recovery process. Rachel is the executive clinical director at Delta Counseling in the Cincinnati, Ohio area. Feel free to look her up if you're in the area. Highly recommend her.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It was fun.
If you enjoyed this podcast and would like to hear more, please subscribe wherever you like to listen to podcasts. Life is too short. Let's take care of each other at work so that together we can make this world a better place.